Hey, everybody. If you're listening to this, you are listening to the first free hour of this episode of The Shift with Doug McKenty. If you like what you're hearing, please consider subscribing to the show in order to access the full feature-length versions of the podcast, as well as have access to the members forum, where we discuss potential topics and interviews and dive deep into the overall concept of the shift. For only $6 a month, not only do you get the full-length episodes, but also an opportunity to co-create with me, your host, Doug McKenty, the future of the show. Go to www.theshiftnow.com or patreon.com/theshift and sign up today in order to help make the shift possible. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. Good morning, noon, or night, whenever and wherever you are listening to The Shift. I'm your host. My name is Doug McKenty. This episode was recorded on January 14th, 2021. Today, I am happy to introduce Howard Lichtman, the principal organizer of the Thick Red Line movement, which seeks to educate law enforcement around the United States and the world about its obligation to protect citizens from violence, while not committing acts of violence themselves. While on the surface, this message seems obvious. Many laws have been imposed by the political class that impose fines and even jail time for many non-violent offenses. Howard implores peace officers to recognize and understand the difference and invites them to respect personal and constitutional boundaries by refusing to enforce crimes that are not actually crimes. He outlines the 5 transgressions which constitute an actual crime. All are a form of theft. These include theft of physical well-being, sexual choice, property, security, and consent. He goes on to describe how many of the laws made by the political class cross the line from protecting citizens from these transgressions to committing acts of violence themselves. Anti-drug laws, sex crimes, asset forfeiture, and red flag gun laws represent but a few of the instances where government becomes the criminal themselves while posing as protectors of the citizenry. Police, in effect, are asked to become criminals through the enforcement of laws that punish perpetrators of victimless crime. Police are actually put in a difficult situation when their job requires them to punish those who have not committed one of the 5 transgressions. Ultimately, when cops become criminals, communities will no longer feel protected. Distrust becomes rampant, and avoidable conflict becomes inevitable. As was made clear through protests over the summer, many communities have had enough. Rather than simply calling to defund the police, Howard's thick red line clearly delineates what is acceptable law enforcement behavior and what is not. Better yet, he goes directly to law enforcement personnel and helps to educate and organize individual peace officers in order to effect change when political action and the politicians themselves seem unwilling to demilitarize and decriminalize police behavior. His efforts have received a lot of positive feedback from law enforcement feeling the pinch between political edict and a real intention to protect. Find out more and join the movement at thickredline.org. If you like what you're hearing, please like, share, and subscribe to this podcast throughout your social network. Due to shadow banning and censorship, we rely on listeners like you for distribution. Please visit the website at www.theshiftnow.com and subscribe to the newsletter for updates as new material is produced, or listen to the hundreds of hours of free content available. I want to thank Howard Lichtman for agreeing to this interview, and thank you for helping to make the shift. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 64th episode of The Shift. I am joined today by Howard Lichtman. He is, what would you call yourself, the executive director, the co-creator of the Thick Red Line, which is an organization that is about approaching law enforcement and to make sure that law enforcement give them, I guess, really to have their back, to make sure they know that you have their back in order to allow them to have an understanding that they really have an obligation to uphold your constitutional rights and to not enforce laws that go against the Constitution, which of course has become a really big deal now that we're all under lockdown with the whole coronavirus thing. So thanks for coming on the show, Howard. I really appreciate it. I know we're trying to organize here in my local community, and you've been going around the country lately and helping other communities do the very same, haven't you? You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the thick red line encourages law enforcement to draw a thick red line in the sand and refuse collectively to enforce any laws that violate not just the Constitution, but natural law,
Hmm.
because the Constitution just codifies our rights that are inherent in us from our Creator and from being, sovereign beings. Just codifies them, but those rights existed long before the Constitution, and we go back 1,000 years to the well-established legal tradition of natural law that says that there's five main transgressions. There's theft, murder, rape, assault, and trespass, and all of those are obviously wrong because there's a victim.
Hmm.
And what we're telling, and what politicians do, is politicians lean on the police by making laws that make things that aren't really crimes. There's not a victim; it's not hurting anybody, but they say society got hurt, or the country got hurt, or the city got hurt, or something like that, and you can't face them in court. And they use that to either try and engineer society or raise revenue. And now the politicians are getting really tyrannical, and they're forcing lockdowns and stealth gun confiscation in the form of red flag laws. And we're letting the police know and supporting the police that they have the ability to say, no, we're not going to use violence on peaceful people. We're not going to enforce laws that violate natural law.
Hmm. Yeah, I know. I looked over the pamphlet that you have on the website there, and the five transgressions was really a great way to simplify the whole concept of natural law down to just a couple of key points. And it's just, I guess as I was reading it, it's fascinating. I mean, I've been attracted to this kind of libertarian philosophy for a long time, so I pretty much really understand these concepts, but it's so difficult to have these conversations with people. I mean, one of the things that actually shocked me about the lockdowns as they came on so fast. But the first thing that went was the right of assembly, right? We're not allowed to hang out together. And
Yeah.
I remember telling one of my friends as it was going on, I was like, man, this is actually really serious. I mean, talk about that thick red line. Like, you're crossing a very serious boundary here. You're eliminating our right to assemble.
Mhm.
It's happening so fast, and yet there was no backlash from the populace, really, and no conversation in the mainstream media about this huge important step that we were about to take. This boundary that we were about to cross. What
Mhm.
were your thoughts? And is that what inspired you around that time to start this thick red line?
Well, first off, I'll tell you this: that when people talk of a right to assembly or a right to bear arms or all of the
Hmm.
rights that we have, a lot of people don't realize that the word right comes from the natural law tradition, and a right. We defined what the five wrongs were, and those are things where you hurt somebody or there's a victim. Well, a right
Hmm.
is anything that's not a wrong. And so if you're not hurting somebody, you have the right to do whatever you want to do, and as long as you're not hurting anybody else, and that's your natural law right, and that's your right as a sovereign being. And if you're not hurting anybody, then you should be left alone by government, and government should really only ever interfere in anybody's life to protect life, liberty, and property. And so when you take the police off of going after real crimes with real victims, then they're not as successful doing that. And then when you have them raising revenue on the population, then that enrages the population, and you get all these unintended consequences of drug cartels and drug dealers and
Hmm.
gangs and violence, and they're all prohibition related. And when you make that go away, we've got a solution that not only restores kind of peace to the streets, but it breaks the backs of drug cartels. It breaks the backs of traffickers. It saves taxpayers billions of dollars, and it gets the police focused on real crime with real victims. And really, the only people that lose are the politicians. And so, we're trying to unite the people and the police against the politicians who are the laws, asking the police to do this. And that to answer your second question, all this really got started because we realized early on that the police or that the government and the media wasn't being honest to us with respect to the COVID. It wasn't as lethal as they were making it out to mean.
Hmm.
It wasn't as communicable as they were making it out to be, and they were claiming that they have the right to commit all of these wrongs on us and have lockdowns and mandates and this and that and all of these things that violate these basic human freedoms. And people that were, that realized the importance of that, like you do, we all got together and we said, hey, we've got to give these officers a way out. We've got to let them know that they don't have to be doing these. This is not really legal. Just because if you use as a denominator of is it legal, did a politician write it down on a piece of paper? Then you get Jim Crow laws and fugitive slave laws and red flag and all of these Nazi Germany. That's
Right.
all quote unquote. The officer has to have the ability to say no to anything that would violate basic morality. And we're explaining and saying that if you're going to draw the thick red line, the logical and the moral place to draw it is no victim, no crime. And then once you go thick red line, then that solves all your problems about lockdowns, mass mandates. And so we're supporting the police to say no.
Right. I mean, it's just so amazing to hear. That's what a great way to say it. If it's not a wrong, then it's a right. Because especially as this COVID thing has gotten rolled through, I've been doing a lot of interviews, of course, with scientists and doctors and whatnot. And I've just been thinking to myself, like, what went so wrong that allowed them to think that they could just do this unilaterally? Oh, state of emergency, everything's shut down. Only the essential workers can go to work. And of course, the essential workers are just sort of arbitrarily chosen by the hierarchy of the system. And I started thinking a lot about what I'm now seeing as healthcare freedom, and thinking to myself, because
Mhm.
people should have a right, especially with the hydroxychloroquine debate, right? We're having this huge debate. I'm, on social media, I'm having these debates. I finally realized to myself, like, why am I arguing about this? Like, this is my personal choice. This is my healthcare decision.
Mhm.
What difference does it make? Why do I have to argue every little aspect of my personal life now? I feel like I have to argue on social media, because the
Yeah.
government wants to choose one way or the other way. And what you're describing here is just, instead of having to codify every right into a constitution, which would actually be an extremely long list, let's just realize if it's not a wrong, then it's a right and it's not your business, right?
Yeah. It's not the government's business what you're doing with your own person at
Yeah.
all. And for them to, drive around like looking for reasons to search your car and looking for, if they can find, some kind of prohibited plant or catch you gambling, then they have the ability to literally rob you. And I used to live in Northern Virginia, and there was a very kind of well-known poker game. It was well-known because it had a big high $20,000 buy-in. It was a bunch of doctors and lawyers, and they would have all of these professional poker players that would come in town to play in this kind of
Uh-huh.
high-stakes game, and they
Right.
have like the world. So like word got out and everything, and so the Fairfax County SWAT team comes one day, kicks in their door. They've got guns drawn, and they shake down the game for 40%. They steal 40% of the money on the table and
Right.
ask, and it's like, who are the criminals? And
Yeah.
so what it's doing is it's making the police the criminals. It's making the police the people that are using violence on peaceful people and stealing their money. And so we don't want the police to be criminals. We want the respectability restored to the police. And the fastest way for the police to restore that respectability is to go thick red line and just say, hey, we're not going to enforce this.
Right.
That's how you've got a good police department. That's how you got a good sheriff. Are they willing to publicly state that they're not going to use violence on peaceful people? They're only going to use violence to protect life, liberty, and property.
Right on. Yeah, I was actually introduced to your work on by Foster Gamble on one of the Freedom Porthole seminars that he's throwing now as a part
Mm-hmm.
of the release of the Thrive 2 documentary. And one of the things that he was discussing, I think, during that conversation was that when he goes out into public, the one thing that nobody really disagrees with is this concept of the non-aggression principle, which is, as you say, if you're
Mhm,
not engaging in one of these five transgressions, then you, there's no reason to use violence. There's no, I
mhm,
mean, if those five transgressions are the violence, any violence is self-defense if that's what is coming at you. If the police were just used
mhm,
to help you engage in self-defense, I mean, I just think what an amazing world it would be, right? I mean, I live in
mhm,
Mendocino County, so asset forfeiture was basically just a part of life around here in terms of the cannabis industry for a long, long time.
mhm.
Um, and so we in this community know full well about how it works to feel like you're getting shucked, that shakedown feeling.
Yeah.
But what he was saying was that when he discusses with people about the non-aggression principle, he almost finds no one who disagrees, right? I mean, this is everybody agrees that we should live life peacefully, and as
Mhm,
long as you're not being aggressed against, why should you use violence? And yet, we live in a society that is it's so challenging. People don't seem to want to pick up on this and really apply it. I mean,
mhm.
what is your experience going to communities and talking to police around the country talking about this in terms of letting people know that we could live in a society simply based on the non-aggression principle, eliminate a lot of this kind of nonsense like you're talking about, gambling, these
Mhm.
crimes of vice that are just personal choices, and turn the police department into a real force for the good and the self-defense of our communities.
Well, that's it. You nailed it, man. The police can be heroes. Leos
Right.
can be heroes if they come down on the side of the people and tell the politicians we're not going to use violence on peaceful people. And to answer your question, what I found going across the country is that first of all, a lot of people didn't really understand that there was a difference between a good law and a bad law, and
Hmm.
there's a significant portion of the country that just thinks just because a politician wrote it down on paper that the police ought to do it, and that they never really understood that the police have the ability to say no to politicians and disobey immoral laws the same way that the military doesn't have to follow orders if they're contradictory to morality, or like you can't order a soldier to go and massacre a village. It's that they have the ability to say no. Well, the police have the exact same ability. So number one has been just the importance of educating the police and the people that, hey, number one, politicians shouldn't be writing legislation that uses violence on peaceful people to either try and socially engineer society
Hmm.
or to raise revenue for their operations, and that they've been doing that, number one. Number two, that they don't understand that they can say no and that the police can say no. And then number three, what I found is that everywhere I go, there is a hotbed of anger and resentment against the police, against the government. Every place we go, we run into groups that have organized, that have gotten together, and they're having meetings. I've spoken at literally over a dozen meetings all up and down the West Coast of 30, 40, 50 plus people. I've spoken at rallies in Sacramento for 3,000 plus, but there's a huge upswelling of anger of people that are just saying, "Hey, we're not going along with this anymore. You blew it. I think this was just too far, the lockdowns and the mask mandates. And so now we need to swing it back the other way."
Yeah.
And when a lot of police officers signed up, there wasn't lockdowns and mask mandates and red flag laws. And so they're all of a sudden, they're like, whoa, hey, what are we going to do? We're being asked to do stuff that's really crazy, tyrannical. And so here we come, the thick red line cavalry, to say, no, you don't. We're going to help you guys. We're going to support you to say no. We're going to make you a force for good in the community. We're going to restore respect to the police.
Right. It sounds so simple. I mean, how do you approach the police into talking about this? And do you find then the police, I mean, surely the police are given orders. Do they feel some how does a policeman or a police person deal with this conflict between following orders and then being put in a position where they have to enforce a bad law?
Well, first off, we've been meeting with, we just started really meeting with sheriffs and chiefs to let them know, hey, that we're behind this. But in the majority of the cases, we've been walked in by community organizations that have either gotten us a personal meeting with the sheriff and gone with us, and we all sit down so it's clear to the sheriff that
Mm-hmm.
the community is supporting this. In some cases, we've got more than two, community organizations, represented. In some cases, the community has done a petition campaign. Santa Cruz, you mentioned Santa Cruz, they've got
Mm-hmm.
almost 2,500 folks that have signed in just a couple of weeks on the petition campaign. And that's something that we're about to roll out nationally at thickredline.org/petition.
Great.
And then finally, a lot of times people will get meetings with their local sheriff, and they'll get in the room with multiple members of the community, and they'll bring us in on speakerphone, throw us on speakerphone, and we'll begin to have that discussion with the sheriff or the chief, and begin to explain to them what their options are to say no to these politicians, and help organize the community to support them to say no, and make sure they understand that the community doesn't want this. The community doesn't want their officers raising revenue on them. The community doesn't want them, searching people's cars and, trying to, rack up arrests of people in the community for victimless crimes, or, the people just want to be safe and secure in their homes and their properties, not afraid the police are going to kick in the door because of their poker game.
Right. I would imagine, just based on where the philosophy is coming from, and um, concerning the issues that are having today, that you are probably dealing more with conservative groups, or do you find, are there liberal organizations that you've been able to work with, or are you communicating with liberals and progressives in a way that is working to get these ideas across? Or, I mean, just what is your experience in terms of the political spectrum, just because things are so divided right now, clearly, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd say the majority of the groups that we've worked with would probably fall into the either conservative or the libertarian camp.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of a single group that would openly be called liberal. But I myself am voluntarist, which is about as fiscally conservative as you can get, and about as socially liberal as you can
Sure.
get.
Yeah.
I don't see anything that that violates something from that a liberal would object to. We're protecting individual rights. We're standing up. We're helping the police say no. We're like, it's a really, really big tent of people that support us. But I'd say the overwhelming majority of people are the ones that have organized to fight the mask mandates. And the assemblies, the American assemblies, has been a strong supporter of what we're doing as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just so interesting. I mean, I don't even know. I'm basically voluntarist as well, and I'm trying to start maybe using the term libertarian socialist, whatever that means, to be like, just to try to, because I'm, part of what I do with this show actually is I'm trying to figure out how to unify the left and the right, and see what you can do about slowing down what I perceive as just the madness that seems to have overtaken American politics, especially over the last 4 years. And I'm getting, I mean, here in Mendocino County, it's overwhelmingly progressive. I think maybe 25% voted for Trump, 75% voted for Biden, and
Yeah.
you start sounding like a Trump supporter, man. And I tell you what, you'll get hammered. And it's kind of difficult to figure out the right language to use to when you start talking about these kinds of issues. Um, and a lot of people around here are really supportive of the lockdowns and really supportive of the mask mandates. And I don't know, it's just been a kind of a frustrating thing for me. And we're trying to get a local group together to organize for this. Um, and I guess I'm just a little bit. I mean, I'm certainly a little bit intimidated, right? To kind of
I got to
go
tell you,
public.
so I got I mentioned that. So the majority of people that have like walked us into police or sheriff's, offices or police departments have been conservative or libertarian.
Uh-huh.
But I got to tell you, I haven't had anybody that said anything negative other than a couple of comments calling me out as a bootlicker because I don't want to shoot cops because they're violating my rights. I want to
Oh,
help them say no.
yeah, yeah.
But other than that, for like this has been well received from the left, the right, the center, because even though some liberal, the liberals, the liberals may be supporting the mask mandates and the lockdowns, but they're definitely not against. They're definitely not for the drug war. They're not for arresting people for prostitution. They're not
Right.
for arresting people for gambling or anything, any of the violence that it does. And so you would be surprised at what kind of consensus you can get around this issue. I've never seen such a big tent as this. And the other
Cool.
thing that I've noticed is that when I started doing this is I never realized how many of my friends and family and people that I know have been personally impacted by victimless crimes. I have a personal friend whose father is serving 26 years. This is going to be, I think, it's his 27th year in state prison in Florida for selling a teaspoon of cocaine to a disgruntled girlfriend in the 80s.
Wow.
I have a friend of mine who is a beautiful young woman in her 30s that has watched her 20s decimated by two DUIs, one of which she was point oh 0.08. And then the other one, she had pulled over to the side of the road, like wasn't driving. Actually, hadn't. I don't even think she'd driven anywhere. But and said, "Hey, I realize I'm just gonna. I shouldn't be driving. I'm just going to hang out here and take a little nap until I'm ready to drive." And because her key was in the ignition, she got a $10,000 plus DUI and
Right.
$20,000 of accidentless DUIs, including one where she wasn't even driving. People are being, they're being financially ruined. They're going to jail for experimenting with, cannabis. There's just everybody I know almost knows if they haven't been impacted by a victimless crime themselves, they know somebody whose life has been ruined. And so it's time to stop ruining lives, officers.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing. Like I mentioned before, I mean, I know lots of families around here in this community that just got hammered that had been, growing cannabis, growing a plant, and the next thing you know, um, the cops will show up if they found cash at your place. It was theirs.
Yeah.
And lives that have just been destroyed for doing nothing but growing a plant. It's pretty amazing. And I do definitely hear you that there's
It's not
so
even
much.
growing a plant. It's not even growing a plant. I know of a Florida game official that was bragging to a friend of mine about a time when he saw somebody smoking herb and then waited until the guy hooked up his boat. He'd been like boating on a lake or something. Waited till the guy hooked up his boat so he could seize the boat and the truck.
Oh, right,
And
right.
like literally, we're going to steal your car and your boat from you.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
unbelievable. But drink all you want.
Well, I mean, right. It's so unfortunate that the temptation is there for law enforcement to pull these kinds of shenanigans to make more money for the department. I mean, it's become a revenue stream for these guys. Instead of being able to realize that, like, this is not moral behavior. It's just like you're talking about over and over again. It turns the cops into criminals when they're enforcing these laws that are bad laws.
Yeah. I heard a story. I haven't been able to verify it, but a friend of mine told me that Nashville got part of its police fund department defunded, and so then they popped up with a to try and plug the gap with a $50 ticket for anybody not wearing a mask.
Right.
It's
I believe that.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. But the population is starting to catch on, and the population does not want the police used for what Sheriff Mack, a thick red line board of advisor member, calls taxation through citation.
Right. Yeah, I was just about to mention Sheriff Mack because I had the great fortune of talking with him maybe about a month ago, 6 weeks ago. And, this was another instance just because I'm continually struggling with the left right paradigm and how to have conversations. I mean, if you go onto the Southern Poverty Law Center website and you look up Sheriff Mack, you'd think he was like, the leader of the domestic terrorist white nationalist organization or something. I mean, people really make this guy because he has been a Second Amendment activist for so long. And I'm having this conversation with the guy. I also I heard the interview that the two of you did together at the Red Pill Expo last month. So I know I have that information, and I saw that conversation. But Sheriff Mack just came across as the nicest guy, first of all, and extremely compassionate, just not at all what people are going to try to make him out to be as a conservative Second Amendment activist Trump supporter type that are getting stereotyped so negatively right now. And so I just wanted to segue with this into talking about the whole Black Lives Matter thing, because it is so strange to me that we're seeing. I mean, what you're talking about often is used disproportionately against the African American community. And I mean, going clear back to the real amping up of the drug war under Nixon. He clearly meant the drug war to attack the African American community. I mean, this was part of it, and the anti-war movement, which
Yeah.
we basically don't have an anti-war movement in the United States right now. So maybe these tactics work. So then we have this whole Black Lives Matter thing go down, and people are talking about how the cops are, the disproportionate use of force against the cops. And then it must be because all the cops are
Well,
racist. Like all of a
it's
sudden
a
you're throwing around the.
disproportionate use of force. It's a disproportionate use of force against the people of color
Mhm,
by the cops.
mhm.
And that is well documented, and that is well understood. And Black Lives Matter is pushing defund the police. And while we absolutely understand and agree 100% and share their frustration with police abuses, we are excited to let them know that there is a much better way and a much better strategy that gives you everything that you want out of defund, but solves all of these other problems, to boot. So, like, if you
Right,
took our strategy versus their strategy and you Ben Franklin it out and put all the pros and the cons of both, I
right,
mean, we just win on every single level. If you want everything that you get out of defund, you can get it, but you can get all these presents as well. I mean, it just leads to dramatically less, crime in society. It shuts down the drug cartels. It shuts down the human traffickers. It saves the taxpayers billions. It restores respect to the police. Like boom, like overnight, just, and it's simple, it's easy to implement. You don't need a lot of training. You don't need,
hmm
all you need is to understand no victim, there's no crime, and that everybody has the right to be left alone. And that's about all the training that the police need to get. All they need to do is get real about enforcing it in their ranks, formally and informally. And then we've got an entirely different country with a lot less violence and a lot more social harmony and cohesion. And nobody has to worry about the police, searching their car or kicking in their door and stealing all the money from their poker game.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, that was just a thing. Like, I was going to bring it up with Sheriff Mack about decriminalizing drugs, and then he brought it up before I even had the chance to, which was actually kind of surprising to me because, and then he was just like, we have got. I mean, when we were talking about, the Black Lives Matter movement, he was just exactly like you. I mean, he was supportive. He understands the frustration and what's going on, and then he's mentioning we've got to decriminalize drugs and we've got to retrain the cops. And that's why I just don't understand the messaging of defunding the police across the board. Whereas what you guys are talking about, I mean, these specific actions that can be taken that says, no victim, no crime. I think a big part of the problem, rather than just jumping to the conclusion, I'm not saying that some police aren't racist, but instead of jumping to the conclusion that most police or all police are racist, it makes sense to me that the drug war has caused a lot of gang violence in a lot of these African American communities. And maybe it makes the cops, a little bit trigger happy when they go into that kind of situation, knowing that there might be more gang violence within those communities. If we decriminalize drugs, then the gangs would go away, just like Al Capone went away,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah. All of the violence. So the violence isn't drug related; it's prohibition related,
Yeah.
and that's really where the drug war has been losing steam as the population is starting to realize that the violence and the unintended deaths and the cartels and the gangs aren't related to drug use, they're related to prohibition. It's prohibition that creates the extravagant profits that attract organized crime into the business that was once served by the corner drugstore. And so,
Right.
that is so now people are, the population is starting to realize, hey, this is not related to drugs. This is related to prohibition. If we want to get rid of the violence, if we want to get rid of the deaths from impurities, if we want to get rid of the gangs, if we want to get rid of the police corruption and everything else that comes with it, then we get rid of prohibition, and then that is the thing that solves all the other problems as well.
It's really amazing. And I mean, I think that the system is just so heavily invested now. I mean, one of the saddest things that's happened in the last 20 years is the rise of what I now just call it the prison industrial complex, where you've got these quote unquote private prisons now that are
Mm-hmm.
literally profiting off of the passage of these bad laws like you're talking about. They're trying to pack these things as full as they can, and we've seen it. I mean, you've got the numbers in the pamphlet, right? And we should discuss those numbers a little bit. I mean, the United States is a penal colony basically. Here in California, the state of California is the largest penal colony in the history of the world, with millions of people in prison right now. I mean, it's a serious
Mm-hmm.
problem.
It's an epic problem, and the majority of the OECD, Organization for Economic Development countries, they've got rates of imprisonment as low as 60, 70 per 100,000 people to around 150 or so per 100,000 people. The United States is over 700
Right.
per 100,000 people. It's 10 times it's 10 times what some countries are incarcerating, and the overwhelming majority of those are for crimes with no victim. It's just the
Yeah.
government says this peaceful transaction is illegal, and even though both of y'all are consenting adults and consenting parties, we now have the right to stick you in a cage and to take your money. And I think the American people are getting sick of being robbed. And it's global too. We've got interest from all over the world. We've already
Oh, that's
started our
great.
first two international chapters,
Great.
and we're really like off to the races. It's a global problem, and hopefully we're able to provide a global solution.
Yeah, I mean, it's once I figured out that the United States had such an imprisonment problem. I mean, you got to really wonder. We've been calling ourselves a free society for so long, but is that really true? I mean, isn't the one metric of a free society how many people you have in prison? And if the
Yeah.
United States has 10 times more people in prison than almost any other country in the world, I mean, we're talking about countries like Iran and North Korea or Russia, or these big bad
Yeah.
boogeymen that we're always hearing about in the news. And the United States is putting people in prison. And not just that, but in solitary confinement. I mean, these horrible
Mhm.
conditions, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
So
cruel,
yeah,
cruel and
yeah.
unusual.
It is cruel and unusual, and it just produces more crime as you're taking people that would not have been involved with crime and organized crime in the least, and you're throwing them into a prison where they've either got to join gangs or they're going to get educated in that prison. I mean, it's not just a bad policy; it's a counterproductive policy that makes everything worse.
Yeah.
What we're doing is we're finding community ambassadors in each county and city or town, and we're giving them the tools to help their department go thick red line so they can support their sheriff. A large amount of times, especially with the sheriffs, they've already drawn their put their foot down and said, we're not going to do lockdowns or mass mandates or red flag laws.
Uh-huh.
And so a lot of these sheriffs are already there. I'll tell anybody that's interested in helping us in your own community that it's easier to work with the sheriff. He is an elected official. He works for the people. The police chief generally works at the whim of politicians and the mayor or the city manager, but the sheriff has the ability to just wave his magic sheriff wand and say, hey,
Right.
we're not going to enforce victimless crimes. And the department doesn't have to enforce victimless crimes. And the officers themselves have discretion on whether or not that they can arrest if it's not a felony. Supposedly a felony bumps it up, but like the officers themselves, whether they're thick red line publicly or not, they have the discretion not to arrest people for things that aren't crimes as well. And so, we're going to continue to educate law enforcement until they all understand that, until we've got a competition among who's the best department, not by how many arrests you make, but how little real crime is in your community and how much restitution you got for your victims, not how much retribution you got to dole out to peaceful people that weren't hurting anybody.
Right. I mean, there's a concept, restitution for crimes that are done against you. Just get paid back what you lost, instead of throwing
Mhm.
people in prison, and then you're still left without, whatever it is that they did to you. There's not
If
really
you
a
ask
way.
most people that were victims of real crimes, would you rather get your money back or would you rather see this dumb kid go to prison for 5 years? I guarantee you the majority of which would say, I'd rather get my money back, but the government's monopoly court system and monopoly police system is focused on this crazy retribution instead of restitution, when the majority of people would much rather have restitution.
Yeah. It's amazing how few people just don't know the options that they have. I mean, we have a lot of options how to deal with crime here. It's one of the other problems. I mean, I love the fact that you guys are going local. That's why I had Sheriff Mack on to talk about going to the sheriff, and maybe you could discuss for a second why it's in part because of the work that Sheriff Mack did, I know, in the 1990s, with the Supreme Court decision that gives sheriffs, as elected officials of the county, the power to make these choices. They can literally choose uh, which laws that they feel are the good laws that should be enforced, and which ones are the bad laws, and tell their guys, don't enforce those laws. And people don't know that they have this freedom. So many people think that, we've got to work in this top down structure. When they say wear a mask, we all got to wear a mask. um, why don't you discuss that? Just how well, I mean, the fact that the local sheriff is so powerful in this way, and then how many options. I know in the pamphlet you even describe private security forces and how they can be used. So we have a choice in terms of who we choose to enforce laws and how they do it.
Yeah, so I'm, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a voluntarist. So I believe I don't believe in government. I don't think it's legitimate, desirable, and necessary. I think everything the government does that is beneficial and helpful to society could better be performed by the free market, by private charities, by mutual aid societies, and that ultimately the police need to be privatized and they need to compete with ADT and West Tech and all these companies that already provide armed response and in many ways are much better to deal with from the community standpoint than the police. I
Hmm.
mean, you're not really worried that West Tech is going to shoot your dog or ADT is going to shoot your dog when they show up at your business. They don't pretend to have qualified immunity and be, immune from prosecution if they screw up or anything like that. And so there might be a little bit more diligence there than somebody that just thinks that they have a pass on morality and doesn't understand the basics of natural law and morality. And so ultimately, I think it ought to be privatized. But I look at this as the perfect, step within the existing system that restores respect to the police at the same time stops them from doing all the things that are earning them the derision and contempt of the population,
Hmm.
and that a lot of times they didn't sign up for, and now they're being asked to enforce lockdowns. And so, like, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for that. I didn't understand I was going to have to bankrupt my friends and neighbors and local businesses and everything. Hey, what do I do here? And like we're saying, we're helping them say, let me show you what to do. Your smartest move is to join arms, link together, organize the department collectively, and collectively say no. Because if you say no collectively, you can't be fired
Right.
the way that officers that have been saying no one by one have been getting fired.
Right.
And so if you take a look at what happened to Greg Anderson in Washington, if Greg Anderson had organized his department and all of them had stepped forward and done a video, then they could not have all been fired. And so what the problem that we're solving is that these guys are getting hammered when they stand up one at a time. We're showing them that not only do they have a better chance of doing it collectively, but we will help organize community support because the community doesn't want them doing it in either. And we found that to be the case everywhere we've gone over the past couple of months on this Western tour.
That's amazing. Well, I'm not sure about the Greg Anderson case. You want to explain that to my audience?
Yeah, so Greg Anderson was a Washington police officer that did a video from his patrol car in his patrol uniform next to his M4, rifle, where he talked about the problems he was having with the lockdowns and didn't
Oh,
believe
okay.
it, and yeah, and his command told him to take the video down. At first, they liked it, and then somewhere up on the hierarchy of the
Right.
pyramid, somebody reached down and told him through his command that no, he was going to delete it, and he said no, I'm not, and so he ended up getting fired, and then there was a GoFundMe for him that raised over $400,000, and now he teaches jujitsu in Washington State instead of being a police officer. But that case really, highlighted the fact that these guys have got to do it collectively, and they got to do it supported by the community. And so we're here to help them and support them to say no, so that they can, so that they're not forced to do something that's going to be immoral and generate bad karma and nightmares for years to come.
What's interesting as you're talking about this, I'm thinking that there are a lot of other frontline workers like nurses and doctors that I've seen getting fired as well. One of the things I try to talk about on the show is that, and as a voluntarist myself, I don't appreciate hierarchical structure. Right, I
Mm-hmm.
believe that we can live and each individual can be responsible for themselves, and then the economy and these larger things are going to be self-organizing, just like the state of nature. Like you're talking about natural law, nature works, but it doesn't need you know it doesn't need a hierarchy with some king on top telling it where the water is supposed to flow. Right, so
Yeah.
um, it's just come to my attention recently, and I'm thinking about trying to organize some interviews with nurses. And you're talking about the police, but I've seen nurses getting fired as well if they come out and they say, "Hey, why are we putting these COVID patients straight on ventilators when we
Mm-hmm.
have lots of other options?" Or, I'm thinking of Dr. Simone Gold, who came out and said, "Hey, this hydroxychloroquine treatment protocol works. Now it's been peer reviewed." Um, and she lost her job because she came out publicly to do it, precisely again because of this hierarchical structure that they're all involved in. And I think, what's resonating with me is this idea of organizing these frontline workers from the bottom up so that the hierarchy can't threaten them, and then they don't have to threaten us.
Well, we're decentralized too. So if you run into anybody that is from, the nursing profession or the medical profession or another first responder that wants to, that has the gravitas and the time and the resources to help organize a thick red line movement within their profession, we'd love to talk to them.
Right on.
We got our hands full right now, just trying to keep up with all the sheriffs and the chiefs around the country that are publicly saying we're not going along with lockdowns, and so we've got our hands full, but I'd love to work with somebody that's
Cool.
helping to organize these other frontline professions.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we've got a decentralized power. I think it's the worst part of the problem. I think that you brought this up in the pamphlet as well. And just to go back to the whole prison system thing, I did an interview, it's been probably 10 years ago now, about this organization, ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. And I had
Mhm.
this epiphany because these guys at ALEC, it's a big lobbying group, and all the big corporations fund ALEC. And ALEC not only targets Washington, D.C., and the federal level, trying to pass federal laws to help the corporate structure, but then they'll go to every state government, and they'll lobby each state as well for all these pro corporate laws that they can pass. And they got heavily invested in the private prison industry.
Mhm.
Super responsible for things like the three strikes you're outlaws. And these guys from ALEC will write the bills and give them to representatives, and then pay the representatives, lobbying money. I mean, this is just, to me, it's the corporate corruption, to just, you know, to just,
Well, no,
it's
this
the root of
you've
corporate
nailed
corruption, right?
you've nailed it. So the majority of the population doesn't want these laws,
Right.
but because it's so easy and so cheap to buy off these
Yeah.
politicians to get them to pass laws to protect your industry or hurt your competitor or to bankrupt your neighbor or to give this company a monopoly privilege over that company or whatever it is,
Right.
that there's so many laws on the books that you just can't use the fact that there's a law as a denominator of is it moral. And anytime a politician writes a law where they're trying to get the police to use violence immorally, where there's not a victim, or to raise revenue or to try and social engineer society, the police have got
Hmm.
to have the ability to say no, because it's so easy to buy off the politicians. And it's such a well known and well
Right.
established like policy that if you're a sheriff or a police chief and you're not prepared to deal with this reality, you need,
Right.
we need to get you a handbook. We call it a handbook. It's the Thick Red Line Handbook, Starter Pack Handbook on how to thick red line your department. And you can get it for free, download it for free, deliver it in person to your sheriff or your police chief, and throw us on speakerphone at thickredline.org. But download the Starter Pack Handbook, see what we're talking about, see all of the statistics about how many people are in prison in this country versus all of the
Hmm.
other countries, and really understand that there's a human life attached to each one of those statistics, and it is
Right.
overwhelming.
Well, and where I was going with this is the understanding that a lot of these prisoners now, so like you've got ALEC, they're working for these corporations, they get in bed with the private prisons, and
Mhm.
then they pass these three strikes, you're outlaws. And what are they doing when they get to prison? They're working for the corporations. They're literally working for, pennies a day in some cases, right?
Mhm.
To manufacture, it could be Nike shoes or whatever, to manufacture different goods for. And I don't understand how you could not equate that to slavery. When I did the
It is
interview,
slavery. We're an
right, right.
abolition movement.
Yeah, yeah,
This is an
yeah, yeah.
abolition movement. We're
Yeah, right
abolitionists
on,
trying to
man.
get rid of modern day slavery,
Yeah,
which
it's
is
serious.
rounding up people, yeah, and just saying, hey, you're guilty of something that didn't hurt anybody, arguably not even yourself,
Right.
and then condemning them to life in for-profit prisons where they're often kind of compelled. It's not forced, but it's like you can either sit around in your cell,
Yeah.
all day, 24/7, or you can have
And you don't
some
have
kind of
toothpaste
payment
money.
to answer phones. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I shouldn't even be laughing. I mean, it's actually horrific, and I hope people who are listening to this understand this, because I mean, this is what happened to me again 10 years ago. I did this interview, and it just dawned on me, like, this is modern day slavery. I love that you're saying that you're an abolitionist movement, because that's exactly what it is. And it's just exactly what it is. And the numbers of slaves now, when you look at it this way, are way above the numbers of slaves that there were in the Civil War. And again, this is way disproportionate to people of color. So here we are, basically back where we were before the Civil War. I mean, realistically, and it's all sort of happening in this way that's under the rug. Most people haven't had this kind of epiphany. Like, I mean, my eyes had to be open to this, and realize the extent of this issue, where they're making excuses. Oh, you're smoking a joint, man. Well, we're throwing you in jail. And the next thing you know, you're working for 30 cents a day, you know, making shoes or making microchips or whatever it is. And
Yeah.
it's just ridiculous. I mean, oh, whatever the excuse, and they'll take your money while while they arrest you.
Yeah.
Oh, I shouldn't be laughing about it, but I guess you got to laugh or you're gonna cry.
Yeah, but it's, now I think finally, like I said, I think the time has come where the pendulum has swung
Hmm.
so far in the opposite direction. And now the police, because they're being asked to commit tyranny at a level that they've never been asked before, they're open. They're looking for a way out. They're looking for a way out that lets them keep their jobs, keep their pensions, but doesn't have them bankrupting their friends and neighbors, local businesses, local restaurants, coffee shops, etc. And
Hmm.
so we're trying to help these guys. We're trying to restore honor to their profession, and we're looking for heroes. And so I just wanted to reach out to your audience and say anybody that can provide us that knows a sheriff or a chief that is in this situation and that needs the support of the community, we're prepared to help. And we'd love to find community ambassadors in every city and town of any size in the country, where we can get this done as soon as possible so that this madness can stop.
Right on. Thanks a lot, Howard, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing with the Thick Red Line. I think it's a great angle. I mean, I've had you on, and again, I talked to Sheriff Mack prior to this because I've been a little bit disappointed. I've actually done some interviews with people that are doing some protests, like in Canada, a person that's organizing the protests over in Ireland or over in Europe. And there are a lot of. It seems like the anti-COVID or anti-lockdown movement has been, really organized and activated in other countries more than I've seen it here. And so, I think this angle with the local sheriff is a great way where people can go. If we're not going to have, huge mass protests and things like that, just doing it locally is such a great tactic to really change things. And not just about lockdown, as you said, but also all of the other victimless crimes that we're all getting persecuted and dealing with every day. So thank you
Yeah.
so much. You want to let people know one more time, just at whatever conclusion you want to give, and let people know where they can go to find out more.
Yeah, so what I want to encourage them to do is help us support and find those sheriffs willing to take a thick red line stand. And so if you know that your sheriff is someone that's already said no to the lockdowns or no to mass mandates, let us know. Contact us at thickredline.org. And there you'll find hard copies of our handbooks, our cards for cops. We've got trainings to help you, show you how to organize your own community to support your sheriff to say no to politicians on lockdowns, mass mandates, and victimless crimes. And everybody knows somebody that has been affected by one of these victimless crimes. So this is really, I think, the time to do something about it. Let's swing the pendulum back the other way. thickredline.org.
All right, great. Howard Lichtman, everybody, thanks for joining the show. And I will see what I can do about arranging, maybe approaching our own sheriff with some kind of on air or live conversation that maybe we can have with the whole community and see if it can at least offer to this community a different perspective and get his responses. I mean, that'd be great. So we'll keep in touch about that. And I'll just let my listeners know that you've been listening to The Shift. I'm your host, Doug McKenty. Thank you so much for checking it out. You can find out more about my show at www.theshiftnow.com. I've got lots of free content up there. You can subscribe to the newsletter and think about subscribing for the longer form interviews for only $6 a month, along with access to the members forum and some other perks. So you can check it out at www.theshiftnow.com. And I'm also on Facebook and YouTube at The Shift with Doug McKenty, and on Twitter at DMcKenty. So have a great one, Howard, and thanks again for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Doug. Good to be with you and your audience.
Yep, you bet. Take care. Well, all right, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That was my conversation with Howard Lichtman of the Thick Red Line. Of course, a play on the Thin Blue Line, where we recognize that there is a thin line between the cops, between you being protected from the criminals. This is the idea behind the Thin Blue Line. But the Thick Red Line takes the opposite tact and says, hey, the citizenry has boundaries too, and the police shouldn't cross these boundaries. And so I wanted to have Howard on because I've been trying to figure out how to really engage in political action, especially in terms of all of these lockdowns that are happening. And one of the angles that has come up has been to go directly to your sheriff or your local constabulary and say, hey guys, you don't have to enforce this stuff. This is a great companion conversation to episode 58 of The Shift that I did with Richard Mack of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, where he also recommends going straight to the sheriffs and saying, hey, you guys are elected officials. You don't have to follow these laws that are unconstitutional. But what I liked about Howard and his approach with the thick red line is that he really delineates what is a criminal activity. He's got those 5 transgressions, all basically associated with a type of theft. If there is not a victim, then there is no crime. And there's so much of what law enforcement does that that really blurs that line. Where is there a victim? What's going on? We've got drug laws, we've got sex crime laws, we've got all kinds of things that are illegal to do when there's no clear victim going on here. And of course, in my opinion, a lot of these laws are designed by politicians to protect a certain class. Certain businesses can get away with, toxic trespass, for example, which should be a crime, but instead there's regulations. You can be poisoned by corporations, at least a little bit, at least up to the regulations. And even if they do break the regulations, where do you go to find those guys? You don't have a right. They're stealing your life from you, but you don't have a right. And just all kinds of laws. One could look at the entire drug war. Not only does it have a racist foundation, I think most of us are aware of, but in a sense, it's really protecting a lot of the big pharmaceutical corporations because they don't have to compete. You have to go get a prescription to get their drugs. They don't have to compete on a free and open market. So you'll find these politically connected corporations passing tons and tons of laws which protect them and their industry from free market forces, but ask the police officers to use violence against citizens that haven't committed any crimes. At most, maybe they're hurting themselves. Maybe they need some psychological help. But the idea of arresting people, throwing them in prison for a victimless crime is just really crossing that red line. So it's important for us to understand where that boundary is. And another important aspect of this is that I think a lot of these peace officers really do feel the pinch. They don't want to use violence against someone for a victimless crime. They don't want to be spending their time when they could be catching criminals chasing after people who haven't hurt anybody else, people that aren't wearing masks, people that aren't social distancing. I mean, in the case of the lockdowns, but so many laws on the books that require police officers to go after people that haven't hurt anybody else and use violence. And I think, again, they feel the pinch and they get a bad reputation. We've seen it with the Black Lives Matter movement, who are understandably upset about police violence in their neighborhoods. But again, how much of that police violence is caused by the drug war and the rise of gang activity in the communities of color around the country? You stop enforcing the drug laws and the gangs go away and you don't have that violence in those communities anymore. So when they talk about defunding the police, again, what I liked about what Howard's talking about is here are specific ways to go about doing that. Most of us, I don't think, really like that the police have become so militarized, and then now using that essentially military might, SWAT teams and what have you, to go after people that haven't committed a violent act against another for all of these victimless crimes. So, just again to really reiterate that the great thing about this thick red line movement is, one, you're circumventing this whole political process. You're not, how many protests do we have to go to when they don't accomplish anything? How many times do we have to write our senator or our congressperson and nothing happens because these corporations have lobbying organizations backed by millions of dollars that are in Congress passing these laws, creating these victimless crimes all the time? Instead, we can go straight to our local police officers, our local sheriff's department, and we can say, hey guys, this is the thick red line. This is where the citizenry has a boundary, And this is a boundary that you should agree not to cross. The cops are going to be happy to know what that boundary is. The police officers want to be protecting the citizens. They don't want to get this backlash, like the backlash that they've had to deal with this summer from the Black Lives Movement. And certainly with all of these lockdowns, police officers don't want to be shutting people down, their small businesses that they've worked their lifetimes, to build up. They don't want to be having to go hassle citizens who don't want to wear a mask, who maybe have medical reasons not to wear a mask. I mean, so many gray areas here, and they're being asked to impose through violence, through the behind that shield that they wear, a lot of these laws where there are victimless crimes going on. So it's a great angle. I urge everybody to go to www.thickredline.org and check it out, read the pamphlet, and feel confident. One of the things I was mentioning, I think I mentioned to Howard a couple of different times, is how intimidating it can be to go and talk to law enforcement about these things. But feel confident that these people are just people, and they're happy to hear from you. And a lot of them are a lot more open-minded to these kinds of ideas than you might think. So it's always worth a conversation to have with your local sheriff or with your local police department. And I hope you take these ideas and kind of run with them. A different type of organizing politically against unjust laws. So I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Howard Lichtman. And again, I am your host, Doug McKenty. This is the Shift podcast, The Shift with Doug McKenty. You can find hours of free material, and you can sign up to the newsletter. Think about subscribing to the show, $6 a month for the long form interviews at www.theshiftnow.com. I'm also on Facebook and YouTube at The Shift with Doug McKenty, and on Twitter at DMcKenty. So please catch up with me there, and I will talk to you again soon. I'll have another one out next week. All right, take care, everybody.